an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire Shadow, Book 2 of Darkness and Dawn, chapters 13 and 14. In these chapters, Lucan is offered an opportunity to get out of jail, and Shera winds up having a heart-to-heart, a heart-ish with Geraldus Teach. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. If you're out there, George, what's up? How you doing? So these chapters it was really fun to be back in Lucan's POV again. I just really enjoy him. And I've already said how much he reminds me of Darius, and I'm realizing that I like cinnamon roll characters a whole lot. I'm reading the Stormlight Archive, and Adel Colin is just low-key my bae. And Lucan is also this way, He has his ruthless moments where he does what needs doing, but he's got a ton of compassion. He's very curious and questioning. He always wants, to have a conversation about a thing, and that is something that I hugely relate to. And as I've gotten older, and mental health and the differences between the way that people process things and the markers of being neurodivergent, having autism, ADD, what have you, I have really begun to realize how difficult it was for me as a kid to understand the reaction that I sometimes got, because I am like Lucan, where I want to talk things through and I want to know why. And my father always interpreted it as being argumentative. And I won't lie. Of course I am argumentative. Yes, I love arguing. I'm not going to pretend I don't. But really, what was at the heart of a lot of that was just, I want to know why you're telling me to do something a certain way. And it's not just because I don't trust that what you're telling me is the right way. I want to know if it is the right way, what makes it the right way, because I find that kind of information helps inform the other actions that I may take in the same arena. And my father was always somebody who valued being obeyed, straight up, without question. I was the wrong kid for him in that sense. I just don't. I absolutely like obeying authority figures in a general sense, where I believe that people in authority, or I have in my life, I will say, up to this point, we had a whole thing happen today with Roe v. Wade that I won't get into, so, I'm pretty much cured of that. But I have been somebody who respected authority figures a lot in my life, because I had a faith, I guess you could say, that they knew what they were talking about, that they knew what they were doing, and that if they said don't do XYZ or do XYZ, that this was coming from an informed place of having experimented with different things. And, that there's a difference between a sign that says don't walk on the grass, wherein somebody walks on the grass and I would be like, oh my God, there's a sign. Don't do that. What are you doing? But if I'm walking with my dad and he says don't walk on the grass, I would be like, well, why not? What's wrong with the grass? Why shouldn't I walk on the grass? Genuinely wanting to know information. And it would just kind of come back in my face where I just told you not to. Why do you have to argue with me about it? I'm not arguing. I just want to know. I just want to know. It helps. So anyway, I really love Lucan, and I feel like the way that he goes about things and his abilities as well, being a reader. I'm kind of jealous. At the same time, I feel like being a reader gives you so much empathy and so many points of view that it could stymie you from making decisions at all. I am somebody who can be really indecisive anyway. I don't need additional information that will cause me to freeze up and not be able to make a decision. So I kind of go back and forth on whether I'd want to be able to do what he does. That said, this conversation, I know that Shera has said how amazing a lot of Lucan's abilities are, and we have seen firsthand what powers he's got. Putting that door together, for example, from fragments, from sawdust, essentially on the ground. We know that is not something that most readers would be able to pull off. However, because it's Shera, and we know that she has an affection for him, I will admit that I took her admiration of him with a little bit of a grain of salt, simply because I think that she admires him so much that I don't want to say she'd overestimate his abilities, but she has said herself that she doesn't feel like she has a great idea of what is possible for readers to do. And if she doesn't know what readers can do, how can she judge that he is like particularly gifted when she doesn't really seem to have like you know what I'm saying? So I sort of was like, all right, well, I believe that he's very good, but I don't know. And then we have this scene wherein he is basically told, you are so good that we're going to send you on this assignment and forgive everything that you've done and you'll be part of the consultants again fully. And I was like, right there. That is the proof. They have such faith in him that he's like the only one they feel they can really go to do this job on their team, or, you know what I mean? And that impressed me. And I love that he, as much as, I'm not trying to say that Lucan is full of himself, but there is a difference between being conceited and knowing your worth. And Lucan knows what the fuck he can do. He is under no illusions, and he doesn't try and do this false humility thing. And I really appreciate that. So Chapter 13 begins with the crack in the sky that happens. And the wording is exactly the same as it is with Shera, I think, where it says the world shook like a drum. I'm actually going to go back and just check that because there's some times in these books where he does that explicitly. He makes sure Will White to write something with the exact same wording, and it's kind of a nice anchor to come back to and be like, okay, so this is the spot where this happened here. Even in the other books, when we go from Shera to Calder, they both have a moment where it's like, and then the handmaiden tore off the roof, and they have that exact same sentence for both, so anyway, it says, it was as though all solid matter rippled, but only for an instant. It was enough to send him leaping to his feet, peering out the bars on his door. At first he saw nothing out of the ordinary, but Hansen the guard hurried up to him with a face painted in panic. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his tone begging Lucan to reassure him. "It's not an earthquake," Lucan responded. Hansen shook his head and wordlessly pointed to the sky. And as soon as Lucan sees that, he's like, all right, cool. They're about to come begging. So I'm going to go shave. I'm going to get my shit ready, tidy my cell, make myself look good. And when they arrive, I will be ready to accept them and their offer. And I love this so much. It's just immediately like, yep, okay, I'm on. It's my cue. Hansen actually looked comforted by the news that the architects would soon be along to fix everything. Lucan rushed around preparing. When the architects arrived to consult the guild's most powerful reader, it had to be clear he'd expected them. Like a true consultant, he'd use the appearance of superiority to his advantage. Not that it would get him anywhere, but it might be nice to see a startled look on one of his jailers. I really like this admission a lot, and I like that it's very different from when we're in Shera's POV. That's not to say that Shera isn't aware of like the theatricality, I guess is the word I want, of the consultants and the way that they manipulate people by the presentation and the information and the way that they share information so as to make it maybe sound like they know more than they do. But Shera just doesn't actually care about that part of it. She tends to fall into it by accident because she is very intimidating. So she has this effect that can be very dramatic, but it really does seem to be mostly unintentional. And I like that there is somebody whose POV we're in that is not only trying for that, but admits that it's not actually, like, the consultants rely on the illusion of it as much as they rely on actual hard information. It's just, So when he was satisfied that everything was in order, he pulled his chair over and faced the door. Patience is a virtue, Ayana had once taught him, but waiting is a skill. Among the first lessons any gardener learned was the ability to sit still and unstimulated for hours at a time. There were some tricks to it, but mostly it took nothing more than long practice. I am deeply curious about how I would be at this. I am definitely somebody who is glued to their phone most of the time, like many of us. If I'm not on my phone, I'm playing a video game, I'm reading, I'm doing something that, like, I have ear pods in, But I also have noticed that when I'm forced to wait, I just don't get as impatient about it as some people do. Like, and I mean in a immediate sense. Like, if I am in a waiting room and it is, my turn is coming up, I don't get as agitated about waiting for 45 minutes as some people can. It's the long-term waiting. That's the stuff that I can have trouble with sometimes, where you're like, yeah, okay, it'll be done in about a week and a half. But I don't know how this, and this is something that, cops who are on stakeouts, they have to do. And now that there are phones, I always wonder how successful stakeouts are these days and how different the training is, and if there are any real specific rules about being on your phone, because it is wild how much what is going on around you falls to the background and basically becomes imperceptible because you are so focused on the screen in front of you. So anyway, and also the fact that, like, Lucan's a reader, and I could just imagine getting very distracted by everything around you that has a story that it's telling you all the time. It would be so simple to fall back into reading the intent of the chair that you're sitting in or the wall that was built next to you or whatever, Anyway, so he sees Yala and he thought it was going to be Carrion. But the fact that Yala was here, he's like, this feels like it's going to be a little bit more official, because if it were Carrion, maybe we could have played this like it's a personal favor. But Yala being here, it feels more like what we're doing here is on record and we are going through the channels. So he just straight up says, I don't know why it cracked, but I do have some ideas. And he's not lying about that. That's not, false. He's not dangling a carrot in front of them that isn't a real carrot. She says, you have the cause right, but the question wrong. We suspect we know what caused it, or at least who. The navigators and the Imperial Guard have made an attempt to activate the Optasia. Now, I don't know if we have heard about this item before. And George, if you're in the chat, feel free to remind me if I have forgotten. But this was one of those moments where I felt like maybe I was supposed to be like, oh my God, they did? And I just had no reaction because I don't remember this. And that might not have been the intent. Maybe it was just supposed to be like, they did what? And make you curious. But I just wanted to make sure this wasn't something that I had just completely forgotten. And he says, I thought that was destroyed. And I love Yala being like, oh, no, we like made up the rumor that it was destroyed. I'm surprised actually that you fell for that. I figured everybody else would. And she says, a team of shepherds managed to sabotage the functions of the device more than a year ago, but I dare say Geraldus Teach could have fixed it by now. She has the support of the Magisters Guild after all, but there have been complications. The Sleepless made their move for the device last week. The Imperial Guards have been battling them for it since that time, and they've brought in backup from the Navigators. The last information we received suggests that the Sleepless have de facto control of the Optasia. Any information you could give us regarding its use would be helpful. I am really not certain why they think the Sleepless have de facto control over it. Do they think that Calder is personally involved with the Sleepless? Because we know his wife is, but she's not really a factor for this right now, is she? And when we go there, it doesn't, like, there's no indication to me that the Sleepless have taken things over or are in charge in the building or anything like that. So I feel like this assumption that she's making, I don't understand where it's coming from. And obviously de facto control doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to tell that they have that control, but I would have expected there to be, and again, it might just be that I am forgetting something from the previous book, but I don't feel like I am on this. So he says, the Optasia is the Emperor's true throne, built into his personal chambers. He used it alongside a global network of specially designed receptors intended to expand and channel his power all over the world. With it, he could keep an eye on all the great elders at once and take action against them at a distance. The Emperor had shared such a vision with Lucan, and the results were staggering. Alone and unaided, the Emperor stood above any reader or soulbound in the Empire. But with the network on his side, he could predict and counter any threat anywhere before it manifested. Which, apparently, once Silver Reach happened, that wasn't really the case for him anymore, but it was a good thing while it lasted, evidently. But as we see later, they have a sort of idea that Lucan will be able to, do something for them with it, and he isn't going to be capable of it the way that he thought. So, yeah, he says you have to open yourself to it, which means reading everything it picks up, even what you'd rather not. When you're searching for elders, you're accepting some of their taint into you. Every time the Emperor used the device, he risked going insane and leaving humanity to die. No one could handle it safely except the Emperors or the Regents, maybe a handful of guild heads. Or me, he thought, but kept the idea to himself. I mean, I don't know. Maybe eventually, but not right now, Lucan. He's overestimating himself a little here. Really, it's not even he's overestimating himself. He's underestimating the Optasia. So, what if the Sleepless found a way to do it anyway? He pointed out the door at the cracked sky. We know they haven't, or that would be the least of our worries. We would be dead or slaves by nightfall. The reader escorting Yala looked a little sick, but the High Counselor herself kept composure. If anything, she looked slightly displeased by his answers. This fascinated me. She's displeased. Why? I know that she is wanting the guild to be in control of things. Does she think that the Sleepless being able to use it would give them some kind of advantage? I just don't understand where she's coming from on that. We've spent much of the last 5 years dismantling the Emperor's global network, so the device won't be as potent as it was in the past, but a weapon is still a weapon. The High Council had elected to leave the throne intact, but it seems we can no longer afford to do so. So, Yeah, he is just like thinking about the variety of weapons that they have at their disposal. And the fact that the consultants are not really, their function isn't supposed to be one-on-one, upfront, open encounters and fights. They are supposed to function in the shadows. They are supposed to use manipulation and disguises and assassination. And it's all supposed to be like very, under the radar to a point. And what they've got going on here is such a big threat that they're not really necessarily going to be equipped for something like this. So she says, if you continue, you must know what you need, he said, or rather who you need. Angrily, Yala slashed a hand at her attendant architect. The woman hustled backwards, gripping her skirts in both hands as she retreated beyond earshot of the discussion. If you continue spilling guild secrets to those without clearance, I will have you executed regardless of what the regents have to say. Is she just basically saying the reason that you're in here, if you do it again? Because the way that she gestures for this woman to walk away, I sort of thought maybe she was saying, you shouldn't be talking like that in front of her. But I don't really know what it was he said, because all he says is you must know what you need, or rather who you need. And I'm like, that's not a secret, though. Then, I don't know. Lucan held back the urge to laugh in her face. He was younger, stronger, and better trained. Despite her accomplishments, she was not a gardener. And then there was his reading. He didn't consider himself a destructive person by nature, but there were precious few readers in the Empire more combat capable than he. Then he considered his situation. He was alone and unarmed, while Yala was neither. And she'd slit his throat and walk away smiling. Well, not smiling. This was Yala, after all. Maybe glaring happily. In the end, he didn't apologize, but he did lower his voice. We need someone to carry Bastion's veil into the capital, and we need someone to unite the guild and lead us into combat. Appoint the Mistress of Mists. The Mistress of the Mists. I can tell you guys right now, I am going to have difficulty saying that one. I just want you all to be prepared, because it's just, I know it's going to be an issue for me. And I love Yala when she hears him say that. He's like, ooh, and who would you propose I appoint to this position? It's a mystery. I can't imagine. And she tells him it's not an option at this time. You can see for yourself the state of the veil. Even if we could find someone suitable to bind the vessel, it would take them weeks to recover. Furthermore, Shera has already taken a soul-bound vessel. And he's like, well, you have your daughter. There's Carrion. And he says you have your daughter. I want, again, to mention, like, maybe me missing something. Maya is with them. Like, later on, he sees a girl that he thinks is Maya, but she's too old to be. And he's like, that's weird, though. I could have sworn. It is Maya, right? Because, like, the end of the last section, the book with both Calder and Shera's, Maya is on their ship, and they took her prisoner, but she, like, immediately escapes because they do not know who they're fucking with. And from the way he says this here, it sounds like Lucan isn't aware that Maya isn't part of things right now. So she says, they have signed off on this as a temporary measure. She withdrew a folded sheet of paper from her pocket and passed it to him. Your release comes with conditions. You must head to the capital and attempt to secure the Optasia as a voluntary assignment. If you survive, you would then return to the Grey Island and continue to perform your duties as a consultant. If you attempt escape, or if you do not execute your assignments with excellence, the High Counselor has agreed to dedicate our full resources into hunting you down. And he says, I might not be able to do this by myself. And she's like, well, if you think that, then maybe we shouldn't send you. And he says, I will make an effort in good faith. It might be possible to destroy it from the inside. And she's like, all right, then go ahead and do it. Disable it. Do what you need to do. So she takes off, and it says, she handed him another folded piece of paper. We are hereby proud to announce the man who will lead us forward into the future, the imperial steward of the Aurelian Empire, Lord Calder Martin. Under his intent, the paper crumbled to dust. There's been a few messages I've gotten that I wouldn't mind being able to just cause them to crumble into dust. But yeah, I had forgotten that this was something that they wouldn't take well because they have had their own encounters with Calder up till now. And we like Calder because we have been in his POV and we've gotten to see his crew and the way everything works. So, but yeah, from their point of view, this is not a guy that you want in charge at all. So he goes back to the Imperial Palace, and he has not been here for 5 years. And is sort of like, I know it's supposed to look different because it's like been a while, but also I'm expecting it to be basically the same. And there are parts of it that are similar. There are like moments where he comes across readings that are familiar, that he has read in the past. And I thought that was interesting. Somebody else's memories being a memory for him at this point, if that makes sense. It's the inception. Even the intent felt familiar as he gathered glimpses from each roof tile. Ancient servants had baked the tiles in their ovens, consumed by awe as they realized that some of their handiwork might shelter the emperor himself. Here was a wisp of frigid terror, as an apprentice worried his work might contain some tiny flaw the emperor would sense at a distance. There was a spot of pure admiration as a roof worker fell from a ladder and was caught in the arms of Geraldus Teach. The memories were not his, but they contained enough nostalgia that they might as well have been. It felt like coming home. I love that. Just really do. So at this point, he has realized that he's a little bit out of practice. He has to sneak into the palace here, and he has not been keeping fit. So it's not like he's completely out of shape, but there is a lot that he used to be able to do easily that is going to be more difficult for him now. And there comes a pretty great scene here, because he's thinking about the variety of ways that he could be detected, the ways that it says most guardsmen were better suited for such mundane tasks as settling riots and patrolling storehouses. While the other guilds like to think of themselves as elites, the guard required greater numbers and therefore had lower entry requirements. But whatever you believed about the Imperial Guard, no one doubted their ability to sense intruders. So, this is when it says, judging by the wisps of hostile alien intent drifting through the air from the center of the palace, he had a hunch he knew what was causing it, the sleepless. As he got closer, he became more and more certain he was right. He crawled over a rooftop and put his gloved hand in something wet. So, going back to what it was that Yala was saying about how the sleepless are the de facto owners of this throne. Obviously, that's what's happening here. But I don't understand how Yala knows. And I don't understand how this happened. And I'm not certain if I'm supposed to. But this piece of roof tile has turned into pinkish pulsating flesh. The light of the moon revealed a square chunk of meat that might have been torn from a cow, except that it was growing out of the roof. I love elders were always unnecessarily disgusting. He is fucking goddamn right about that. Honestly, Will, I would argue that maybe you're being unnecessarily disgusting, but because I know your other writing and I know that you don't just resort to this, I will give you a pass for these books, but I've got my eye on you, sir. So when he reaches the building where his chambers are meant to be, he sees this, like, basically what looks like the exploded remains of some being and all of its chunks of flesh all over the place, and it stinks. It's rotting and it's fucking disgusting. Judging by the moisture, whatever had happened here seemed fresh, which explained the mess that was the Imperial Guard. They were still dealing with the aftermath. And then he sees Calder walking out. His limp and thick bandages wrapped around his shoulder and left leg showed he hadn't recovered from the events of that day. At least not as well as Shera had, with her soul-bound assisted recovery. One of his companions was older and taller, wearing a pristine white suit and rounded hat. He also wore a pistol, as well as a silver Luminian sun on a chain hanging against his shirt. Andel Patronus, Martin's quartermaster and second in command. His second companion looked old enough to be his grandfather, a crusty-looking old man with a shaggy gray beard spreading across his chest. 2 pairs of glasses hung against the beard, and his collection of pistols put the other 2 to shame. He had a gun on his left hip, on his right, 1 in each boot, 1 shoved down the back of his belt, and Lucan was surprised his pants stayed up with all that weight. Dalton Foster, the gunner for Martin's ship. I gotta be honest, you guys. I miss these dudes. I really do. I love all of this stuff with the consultants, but I think that I may prefer the Calder books overall. And, we'll see. We'll see if that maintains with this pair of books, but there is just something about that company. I think it's the fact that they all actually seem to generally like and trust each other. Whereas the consultants, it's like Shera and a connection between her and Lucan, and then everybody else, there is a sense of mistrust. It's not like so much so that she is constantly on guard, but it is enough that I don't feel like she can ever really relax, and nobody ever seems to in terms of being a consultant. It's just part of the training that you really shouldn't ever relax. And I get it. But it's not as much fun to be part of that world, in a way. At first, he thought the woman with them was Maya. She had short blonde hair and bright orange eyes that gleamed even in the faint light, which made Lucan take a second glance. The second look revealed that she was wearing the uniform of the Imperial Guard and was several years older than Maya. Of course, it was ridiculous in hindsight. What would Maya be doing with Calder Martin, of all people? What is happening? Like, it is Maya, right? But how does she look older? Do they have the ability to do this? Is there somebody... Like, I can't remember if changing someone's appearance is a thing that has been established as possible in this universe. So, did they use makeup? Is it simply that? I just... Very, very curious. In all, Lucan wasn't sure whether he'd been dealt a winning hand or a losing one. The distraction of the guards was a stroke of luck, but Calder Martin's presence could potentially pose a problem. And finally, he's just like, you know what? Shera would do it. So this is when he does the leap from one building to the other, and he is just like, he hits his elbow and is just kind of like, oh my God, this hurts so bad. He panted through his shroud, but inwardly celebrated. I can't believe I got away with that. He lifted his eyes to stare straight into the face of the shortest Imperial Guard he'd ever seen. The man had his legs replaced with what seemed to be the hooved, reverse-jointed legs of a goat, and he was carrying a sheaf of paper in his hands. His eyes went completely round when he saw Lucan vault in, and he drew breath to scream. Lucan's first reaction embarrassed him immediately. He hugged the man close, clapping a hand over his mouth. And it takes him a minute, and he finally remembers that he's got fucking, like, needles with paralytics. But, yeah, at first he just grabs the dude like a fucking regular vanilla dude. And I love he's just like, oh my God, Shera would literally never speak to me again if she saw what I had just done. So... he runs to the chambers, and this is the first thing that he notices is like completely different. It had been ruined. Some of the damage was old. The floor had been torn up, nail-studded floorboards covered by a tarp laid down for workers. The walls had been stripped of polish and decoration. All the furniture was gone. The pictures he remembered no longer hung on scarred walls, and the quick lamps, my God, you guys. I swear, I don't know what's going on, but as I get older, I feel like I just can't talk. The quick lamps had died down for lack of fluid. In total, it looked like a tenement that had been stripped by desperate, drug-crazed looters. Most alarming of all, the boards of the far wall had been pried out and away like a rib cage displayed to expose the heart. The Emperor's armor and weapons were missing, but something else had been kept within that hidden chamber, and it was still there. A framework of steel bars and wires that looked more like a chrome cage than anything else. So Lucan reaches a hand and barely touches it. 1,000 eyes watch you, eternal, hungry. They want you and seek to devour you. He tore his hand away, stumbling. It took long, uncountable minutes before his mind was back under control. And when he finally had all his senses in working order again, he could feel a sheen of sweat on his skin. And he is just like, look, I came here thinking I would figure out how to work it. Maybe we could find out some information. No. This thing is bad fucking news. I brushed a gloved hand and it almost incapacitated me. Shit needs destroyed. That's all there is to it. And I appreciate that. So, he ran over to the door, tugging off his glove and placing his palm against the door. Most readers couldn't do this, but he'd been trained by the Emperor himself. So he's reacting here to the fact that, excuse me, just adjusting on my weird sort of seat here, the dude that he incapacitated is fucking gone when he goes back out into the hall. Now, I don't know if Lucan underestimated these guards and their ability to like deal with poisons. If there's something about the upgrades that they get with their body mods that makes them, more difficult to like bring down in that sense. But the fact that Lucan did not succeed in just getting this man to stay unconscious, maybe it's just he after touching it, it says that it takes him a while to get his mind back under control. It may have just been longer than he anticipated needing, but, nevertheless. So he extended his intent past the door, seeking a brief impression of the outside. So I love this. Passion, ambition, satisfaction, the itch of still healing wounds, and the enjoyment of a man sitting at a gaming table against an unexpected opponent. Calder Martin. Irritation, focus, mild frustration. Dalton Foster. Curiosity, anticipation of danger, dry amusement. Andal Patronus. Diligence, alertness, the dedication of a hound set to its course. The Imperial Guard with the orange eyes. She was running away, already shouting orders that Lucan could almost hear through the bronze of the doors. Now, I just really want to know what one would get off of me. If you were to read my intent, what's the vibe there? She really wants to be playing Animal Crossing right now. I just get a sense. She wishes she were playing Animal Crossing and eating Cheetos. That's always my vibe. So he put his hand back against the door and concentrated. 2 minutes later, as the Imperial Guards had begun leveling hidden crossbows at his back, he triggered his intent on the door. It crumpled like a sheet of tin, bending over with a shriek of metal as though it was being crushed by an invisible hand. Keeping the simple image of a ball in his head, pouring his intent into the door, Lucan gave the enormous mass of bronze a simple push. It rolled forward, a loosely wrinkled ball like a rolled-up handkerchief, straight toward Dalton Foster. All three of the Navigator Guild men dove out of the way, but Lucan was running close behind the bronze. He leapt out of the door's shadow just as Foster looked up, his gray hair standing out in all directions, eyes wide. The old man had just started to bring a gun up when Lucan brought his own hand down, clutching a poisoned needle. He ducked out of the way as the gun fired. So all of this, like in general, he's going up against everybody, but he is intentionally avoiding anything lethal if he can. He just doesn't want to have to do that. And that's the difference between him and Shera. She'll do the easiest thing, which is fucking take them out. And he is like, but I don't need to. They don't need to die. I just need them to not like be involved right now, you know, which I really do appreciate. So his fingers dipped into his belt again, withdrawing spades, whipping the triangles of steel, one at each man. And he, again, his aim isn't great. He goes wide. He's like not completely hitting this. So he placed both hands on the stones of the courtyard. Active reading took time and understanding, and it typically only worked on creations that had a certain amount of intent invested to begin with. In passing every day, these had been invested by the emperor himself. At the slightest urging, the floor of the imperial palace courtyard came to life. And that is where that chapter ends. And I will tell you what, guys, I am dying to know what he does. Does he just make it like roll? Like you can make it just unstable to walk on and difficult for your enemies, you know? I don't, like, there are so many possibilities. If you can literally control the terrain that your enemy's on, there's a lot that he could do. There's a lot that he could do, and I'm very excited to find out. So then we go to chapter 14, 5 years ago, and Shera is with Geraldus Teach here. So I love this. Every time Shera trained with Geraldus Teach, she ended up with her face in the dirt. And I really enjoy any time that there is a specific person we get pointed out to us who has been a match for Shera. We know how good Shera is. So if she is like, oh my God, fighting this person is such a drag, I just get my ass whooped every time. They must be very good, and that is high praise. So good for you, Geraldus. So she gets up and she's behind a tree. This is all part of like a training exercise. And she looks up and Maya is trapped underneath Geraldus. And Maya tries so hard, guys. I feel for her. She's just like, I'm not done yet. But she can't get out of it. She really does try. She is determined, but it isn't working. Lucan reached behind his back, fingers dipping into a pouch and emerging with a small glowing orb that looked like a tiny quick lamp. As soon as he grabbed it, he whipped his arm around to throw it at Teach. She tugged on the hilt enough to bear an inch of black blade. Shera shivered. She'd been told before that she was about as sensitive to intent as a plank of wood, but the weapon projected the same sense of formless dread that she felt in a nightmare. It was a paralyzing, hopeless, oppressive fear. I really like the formless dread that she felt in a nightmare as this, like, there's just trying to say we all felt this terrible fear. That's just a really difficult thing to process in my head and imagine, because let's be honest, when you have lived a fairly privileged life like many Americans, the sense of fear, real, genuine terror, isn't something a lot of us feel often in the same way. There can be, deep anxiety, but that kind of immediate danger, that there's a threat to your life, it's not really something that I have enough experience with, at least personally, to call to mind how that feels. But a nightmare, and I like that it's that formless dread is the way he expresses it, because I think we've all had that kind of nightmare where there isn't necessarily anything wrong with what's happening in the dream at the moment, but you know that shit has just taken a turn and it's different now. And it's an interesting thing in dreams. And I'm somebody who dreams every night. I dream. It's really tiring, actually. I have like it will be like a full cast production. There will be a soundtrack playing in it. It's just too much, honestly. I wish that I could turn it off. But the nightmares that I have are the kind that, like, when I recall them literally years later, I feel my whole body tense and the hairs on my neck will stand up, and it's just this, like, so all I had to do was imagine that feeling and the dreams that caused that, and the idea of feeling that anytime somebody just, like, partially pulls this weapon, no thank you. She'd only seen Teach fully draw Tearfang 3 times, and in all 3 cases, everyone in the room had been frozen in fear until the sword was back in its sheath. Even this glimpse of the blade felt like a predator passing dangerously close. But it was good practice. This was what it would feel like if they had to face the Emperor in combat. And Lucan's arm and he drops the globe, and it shatters, and he literally passes out. And Shera is looking at him like, man, I really am jealous of what fucking readers can do sometimes, but I don't know if I am willing to pay that price, because he is just so sensitive, That's the end, Shera, General Teach announced. I have instructors lined up for these two to point out where they went wrong, and I'll give you my notes personally. And Shera is still like, oh, that's the end? I doubt it. So while Maya is struggling to get up, she's trying to sneak up on her, and she comes up behind her and, like, gets up against Geralis's, like, back of her leg, and is like, is this a disabling strike? And I love that she says it, like, as a question, sort of hopefully, but she doesn't have the confidence that it actually worked, and Teach just says, nice try. So Geralis takes her over to basically the locker room, and she makes sure that everybody gets out of there so that the two of them have complete privacy. And Shera the whole time is kind of like, okay, so what's going on? Why are you separating me from them? Because you've never done that before. So obviously there's something that you just want to talk to me about. And she is thinking, oh, they figured out about how the consultants want me to murder the Emperor early, and she is pulling me to the side so that they can kill me. I guess the death will probably be pretty quick. But then she thinks, maybe the Emperor already knows and he just hasn't done anything about it because, like, he just doesn't need to right now. And she finally stops with the conjecture because she's just like, I don't know. And there's no point wondering about it. I will find out. So they go into the bathhouse and they each shower, and the shower is wild. First of all, of course, Shera stays armed the whole time. She thinks that this knife is hidden. I do not. I believe Geralis knows it's there the whole time, but it doesn't really matter in the end. So they get undressed, they get into the shower, and the first thing that happens is straight up regular water. The stream lasted precisely 1 minute before the water trickled off. She pulled the chain again, twice, and a stream of soapy water came out of the shower head. The soap was created and mixed in all chemical basins beneath the bathhouse every day, with a certified Canitalian alchemist down there full-time to ensure the proper mixture. After another minute of that, she pulled the chain 3 times, and more water poured down. I don't know how I would feel about this. Like, what do you guys think? Like, showering in water that is soapy, instead of soaping yourself and then rinsing it off, it just feels like a recipe for your eyes to hurt, you know? Like, it will get into your eyes, I would imagine. I don't know. It's only a minute, so maybe it's fine. But that made me sort of like, I don't know about this. So then they go to the next room, and there is a big, like, hot pool, basically. And Teach jumps in without going down the steps in a way that if there had been attendants, they would have been like, bitch, no, don't do that. And Shera is like, interesting. She'll just kind of maybe ignore the rules sometimes. That's good to know. So she lounges for a minute, and I love that she says, stay still. And there's this horrific noise, and the space warps around them. And then Teach says, all right, if there was anything alive besides us, there isn't now. So we can speak freely. What did she do? That is so scary. She doesn't have her weapon on her. So it's not something due to that. What did she do? Anyway. So she says, basically, the Emperor has asked me to help you with your assignment. And the whole time, Shera is like, this feels like a trap. I don't know what's going on here. I don't like it. It feels like they're trying to test me somehow. And she says, I'll give you whatever assistance I can to kill the Emperor. She fixed eyes with Shera, waiting for the consultant's response. Do you want to see the Emperor dead? Shera asked. People responded more honestly to simple questions. Teach flinched as if the question pained her. And Shera, she doesn't give an answer. At first she's just like, my preferences don't matter. But Shera's like, no, but I want to know. Literally, tell me, what do you want? And then she gestures to a scar on her collarbone. An X. And she starts recounting this story. I failed the physical test for the Imperial Guard 3 times. And Shera is like, wait, what? She's a legend now. And she failed 3 times? And she says, I wouldn't quit. I got it in my head that not only was I going to make it to the Guard, but I was going to aim for the top. The guild at the time didn't have anyone who could bond with this sword. I wasn't the brightest kid, but I had a head like a mule, and I didn't quit. And she says she went to the magisters, and they basically told her, you may as well go beg in the streets, because there's no way that you are going to succeed at this. I crept onto the roof of the Imperial Guard barracks. Light and life. I haven't thought of this in years. I snuck onto the building. I waited for sundown. And somehow they didn't see me. As it got dark, I slipped in. And I realized now it was lightly guarded because they were waiting for me. They were people who wanted there to be a thief to deal with. They wanted some conflict. They wanted a fight. But I was still going for it. I didn't know what I was going to do. Once I had it, I had this vague idea of taking it to a reader and getting him to make it my vessel. So it was sitting there, unguarded. And then the Emperor walked in, except I did not know that's who it was initially. And then he spoke, and I was like, oh my God. Right. Okay, that's who this is. And she said, I thought he was going to execute me, like straight up. But he said that he liked me and knew I could be trusted and that he was going to give me an opportunity. He didn't hand me the sword, for which I am thankful. If he had, it would have killed me. He told me where to start. On his direction, I hunted down a bone reaver in the ice field south of Erin and carved out its heart. It replaced my own. Yikes! These people are just willing to do too much. Straight up. I'll just say it. That's too much. We got a guy with like goat legs. What possible, what does that offer? Having goat legs, does that assist in something? I don't really, climbing? He seems to be a clerk. He's just walking around with papers. I don't know. I would like to know. There's a woman at one point that salutes with 2 right hands. That doesn't feel like it would be super helpful. I just want to know. So it took me over a year of solid effort and months after that before I adapted physically. but I earned my spot on the Imperial Guard. 2 years later, I picked up Tearfang for the first time. Thanks to the power of the Bone Reaver, I could withstand the sword's intent. A year after that, Tearfang had become my vessel, and the guard was mine. The Emperor has outlived everyone else in the history of the Empire. I want him to outlive me. And Shera is just like, I don't want to kill him. I will wait until it's necessary. And Teach says, I would do everything I need to do, everything that haunts me in my past, over again, if it meant I never had to see an empire without the Emperor. Are you asking me to kill you first? You won't have to. If Nkothi finally claims the Emperor's sanity, I will stand against him myself. My death will be your cue. If he kills me, that means the Emperor is gone, and you can put him to rest with a clean conscience. What makes you think we can kill him if you can't? The Emperor believes it, and I trust his judgment far more than my own. Even if we set that aside, he could turn Tearfang's power against me. I've got a better chance of walking to Kellerak. I will try, Shera said. I can't promise anything. I'll do what I have to. But I'd rather wait for you to fight him anyway. You might weaken him for us. That eases my mind. Thank you. Now I will help you as best I can. So she goes over to Shera's weapon, and I love Shera's reaction of complete panic, because this woman is getting between her and her gear in the locker room. So Shera is just like, what is she doing? I don't like this. Teach pulls out her left blade. She held the battered bronze up to the light of the nearby quick lamps, turning the blade to admire it. I won't be able to awaken your blade or empower it in the way a magister might, but I'm told that my intent is focused, and Tearfang's power rests in me just as it does in the sword. You should see some benefit. Shera realized what Teach was doing while standing there, holding the shear. She was investing it, as Lucan had done several times before. The easiest way to invest something was to use it for its intended purpose, but readers often managed it through sheer concentration, and there was nothing saying an ordinary person couldn't do the same as far as Shera knew. Teach casually drove the knife into the wall with one hand. Tiles cracked, crawling away from the point of impact like a spider web. She pulled it out and brushed away plaster like nothing had happened. If you have to finish your assignment, there's only one tip I can give you. Don't stab the heart. Nkothi's heart, I mean. You'll have to separate the heart from him immediately, or the dead mother's power will bring the Emperor back to life, but do not damage the heart itself. What happens if I do? Nkothi's intent will be released, and you will die a horrible death. Understood. And we know it's definitely what she does. She does stab the heart. So what happens to cause that to be necessary? To destroy the heart, you can take it to your Council of Architects. They should know how to contain it. Otherwise, you can take it to the head of the Magisters Guild or the Black Watch. Forget that. Do not take it to the Black Watch. And I love that Shera's being like, yeah, I was never going to do any of those things, but sure. And they start to get dressed again. I really had to repress a grimace because it says that Shera's clothes are stiff with dried sweat. And apparently, normally, while people are bathing, servants replace their clothes with fresh stuff. But they didn't this time. And just the idea of taking this gorgeous shower and bath just to put your grody clothing back on, I hate it. It sucks. So Teach scraped the bronze shear along the edge of the ancient executioner's blade, then sheathed her sword. A little of that should rub off, but I'm no reader, maybe it won't help at all. And as we know, it did. Because that shit wound up, that's definitely, it did something. So, at this point, a female guard with 4 arms comes running in and tells them the capital is under attack and it's the elders. Has the Emperor been evacuated? He ordered us to abort that. I'll see to him. I want 6 guards with me and pull everyone else you can reach back to the Imperial Palace. Until the Emperor is safe, we have no other priorities. And then she tells Shera, gather your team. And Shera's like, already gone. And that is the end of the chapter. So I really want to know if this is the moment, if this is the battle that's going to lead to the Emperor's death, because I want to see how that works, what happens. But I don't know, it might be too early for that. This might be a bit of a feint. So we'll have to wait and see. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again very much to George for commissioning this series, having a ton of fun. Thank you again to all of you for listening. Hope you're enjoying it. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.